Hey guys, here's a simple tip for making better decisions when you play chess. If you have a piece on a good square, don't move it anywhere unless you're really confident it's going to a better square. I mean, that sounds really intuitive, but I've seen this example in a couple of recent games of expert level players. So let's take a look at um, how it came about. This one is from a student of mine. Now we have a complicated Sicilian position. And obviously, the best piece for black in this position is this lovely knight in the center. I mean, you often have to pay good money to get a knight like that in chess, but black managed to do it. And in this position, black made this kind of very strange to the eyes move knight g6. Like as soon as you see that, you're like, huh, really? Like that knight was so good, and somehow we're supposed to believe it's going to be better on g6 because of what? Because like it attacks the pawn on h4 or tries to go to f4. I mean, obviously there's some ideas of why the knight went there, but still, like the general principle is like the knight was not the problem of the position. It was actually um, what the position was anchored by, right? So unsurprisingly, black is going to get a bad position in multiple ways here. For example, white could have just played h5. I mean, basically sending the knight either back to e5, in which case you're just wasting time and white will keep on advancing, or if you insist on going to a different square, then they can take you and initiate some forcing moves. And based on the fact that your king is in the center and your position really doesn't have great harmony here as black, there's just things that are hanging that are not that easy to protect. And you're going to have a really hard time getting your king out of the center with this bishop hanging. So yeah, this would be quite bad for black. And even what happened in the game wasn't such a cup of tea either. White took this bishop and then played h5. The knight went back, g5, and still black's king is getting pressured. Why did the knight go to g6 only to come back to e5? We don't really know. And here, white just needed to find a more tactical solution, which was bishop e3, discovery on this pawn. And after queen takes, queen g7, you win the knight back, and you're going to have an extra pawn. But most importantly, black's king on e8 is still not very secure, and the rooks are not connected. So it's quite a sad move, I would say, knight to g6, right? So what should black have done instead? Well, I mean, there's one thing lacking in black's position, and that's castling. So this move really needs to be looked at. Now, of course, it looks dangerous with white's pawns, advancing, and g5 is the obvious problem, but you have h5, and even when white tries to open up the king side, I mean, yeah, like it's very typical stuff. The e6 pawn is a bit weak. You don't want to just capture here and get forked, right? But you can do various things, including just like knight g4, very powerful square for the knight. So actually the knight can move from e5, right? But that's because he's going to a really, really good square with a tempo on the bishop. And in some cases, the queen can even come here instead, right? So if they take, you take, and they just really have no time to take that pawn for various reasons, like queen e5 would be very strong, or even taking that bishop would be strong. So black would be doing well. So yeah, I mean, instead of like making good pieces worse, focus on making bad pieces better, right? So if the king is an unresolved problem, you got to focus your energies on seeing if castles can work, even if it appears a bit threatening to you. Yeah, like sure, it is a bit threatening to castle into this, but we have principles that can defend us, right? Like keep the files closed so you walk past that pawn. And as long as your pieces are developed, centralized, working together, your position should be playable. And that's why the move g6 is not a killer for black. Now the next example is from a game um, that was played involving a potential opponent of mine, actually, in the American Cup, Zoe Tang. She was white in this position. And, well, she had made this decision to trade on c6, which is rather risky because you are giving up space and you're opening the b file for black, and then you're castling into that, and all for the reason of having an attack on d6. So, yeah, how should we react to that? How should we protect that pawn? Well, in the game, black played a move that I was like, kind of had to raise my eyebrows at, guys. Black played knight to b7. Now, it's not a move you want to play. I mean, the knight was wonderful on c5, and it's not wonderful on b7. It's just passive, right? So I don't know. I mean, protecting pawns is important, guys, but having active pieces, I think, is more important. And actually, black has a choice of reasonable moves. I mean, and they all involve just sacrificing that pawn and going for piece activity, right? But these moves be involving activating the queen on this diagonal, right? She's sort of the natural piece to focus on. There are open files there. This is actually a cool move. And it seems like you're going to have a big problem with your knight. But if they take your pawn, then you're going on the attack, right? That's why, castling into the open files was pretty dangerous. And there's no time to take the knight because that's checkmate. And if b3, we're of course going to sacrifice it and have like a huge attack here with a checkmate threat and the passed a pawn. Definitely not fun for white. So white really shouldn't be taking that pawn at all. But the queen has ideas of going to b4, great square, pawn to a3. I mean, just the bishop can be developed here. It's really just such a lovely position for black, with very clear play on the queen side. And if you don't like that, then, feel free to play this move. Another good square for the queen. And if they take the pawn, you can just protect your knight like that or move it away. I mean, that's the thing, guys. You are getting plenty of compensation for the pawn. It's like, it's just not that important. What's actually important here is the piece play. It's the play against this king. It's the constant ideas of, the knight coming in, the rook coming in, maybe the bishop coming back into the game like that, pawn a3 thrust. I mean, there's just a lot of play for black. But the main thing I want you guys just to take away from this example is that there's just certain moves in chess that we really don't want to do. And you have a very nice looking knight on c5. To bring him back to b7 is extremely sad. It's not a losing move, right? It's not like why black, black is not immediately losing the game after that, but it certainly is it's a big part of why black lost. And I think eventually black, I'm not even sure if that knight ever moved. I mean, maybe at some point it did, but it stayed on b7 for a really long time as white was actually starting their own attack, right? Because we've got opposite sides castling. So within a few moves, black was completely on the defensive. And yeah, they're trying to put their pieces in the right positions, but white's attack is coming. And the reason black is slow is because time was spent on that, and even the b file is blocked, right? So at this point, white is just ahead, and they're threatening g5, and that's what comes. You can see that basically black is really, really paying the price for that knight b7 move. All right, so that is the basic lesson, guys. I mean, seeing this in the game of these examples in the games of expert level players, it just made me think that, we had to address it. Good pieces should be staying on their squares. Do not consider that like your strategy, no matter what you think you're trying to accomplish or defend. Try to not take those good squares off their position. Try not to take those good pieces off their positions. And they really should only be moving to better positions, guys. That's the whole aim of the game of chess. See you next time.